Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast. My name is Paul Ellis, and I'm your host for these programs about developments in this fast-growing industry. Today's podcast guest loves to speak with investors and asset managers interested in the sustainable food space. She's an advisor to companies that are optimizing logistics, reducing supply chain costs and emissions, and fostering community engagement as sustainability goals they expect will produce greater return on investment and profitability and help them become preferred companies to work for in their industry. Shila Wattamwar is a Fast Company Impact Council member and a contributing writer on sustainability themes. In a recent article, Sheila highlighted her framework that maps activities to positive actions, rather than just the issues we face, with the intention of making daily sustainability-focused action more tangible for consumers as well as investors and asset managers. Hello, Sheila, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast.
Hi, Paul. Nice to see you, and thank you so much for having me today.
It's a pleasure to speak with you. It's been quite a while since we have worked together, but we're going to jump right into the questions, and we'll do the social stuff later, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to begin our discussion with an example of positive sustainability action that I can take as a consumer focused on healthy eating habits.
Yeah, look, how we eat is such an important area when we speak about living more sustainably. Just to throw some statistics at you, food systems account for approximately 25% of the emissions emitted into the atmosphere and about 92% of the world's water consumption. And like you said, it's a great example of how the sustainability of us, i.e. our healthy eating, has a very strong alignment with the sustainability of our world. So I think, food systems is such an important area. The better food and agricultural practices that support the world also typically lead to a more nutrient-rich diet for us. So what we as consumers can do to kind of support this dual reward? Well, I think there's three broad areas. One is the big one. It's waste less. And this kind of translates to everything we do across our lives, but certainly in the food area, we waste approximately 1/3 of the food produced that is intended for human consumption every year. So that's equivalent to about 1.32 billion metric tons. And enough to feed 3 billion people. So it's a lot of waste. And so the more we can do there, absolutely the better, we can support sustainable food systems. The second piece is make some dietary shifts. By no means am I saying eliminate any animal diets. I know that's quite difficult and even controversial, but certainly reducing diets that are heavy on animal-based products, and instead eating more plant-forward meals can significantly reduce the GHG emissions, as well as the water and land use pressures that we impart on the food systems. So, for example, I thought this was quite compelling when I read this. Livestock uses 83% of all farmland to produce just 18% of food calories, while food crops, so fruits, vegetables, and grains, use only 17% of farmland to produce 82% of the world's calories. So as you can see, if we make a little bit of a shift, it can really go a long way with regards to preserving land use, like I said, emissions, and even kind of the water that is dependent on the system. And again, further, this diet, that is a little bit more plant forward, has significant health benefits associated with it, leading to more sustainable livelihoods. And last, I would just say is eat from sustainable local sources. Make sure that you're supporting your local farmers to encourage fair wage for their work. Make sure that you're trying to look at the practices of the farmland, whether they're regenerative or not. Those are the areas that I think we as consumers can make a big difference and impact here.
Sheila, I've been aware of the imbalance related to meat consumption and animal products for years, but I didn't realize that the percentages were that extreme. That's it seemed just with some minor adjustments in people's diets, we can probably reduce not only consumption but reduce greenhouse gases and pollution and waste tremendously.
Yep, absolutely. 25% of the emissions is dependent on the food system. So, and again, any adjustments we make there can have significant effects overall.
Okay. Well, now let's talk about investors and asset managers and how they can stay aligned with the rapid pace of change in sustainability-focused personal health issues for today's multiple generations of consumers. There's much more awareness around the globe today about these kinds of health-related issues and as consumers. Let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I think that asset managers for centuries have had very strong practices, and they've had developed their own thesis and methods. But one thing, as kind of we evolve, new innovations come about, I think it's important for investors and asset managers to look more closely at the innovations in the sustainability space, particularly, whether it be in sustainable food and agriculture, personal health, energy infrastructure, or even fashion and textile. The sustainable action is being developed now and often in the private and venture space. And so it's important that asset managers are valuing companies, even large publicly traded companies, on the adoption and investment in these new innovation areas. For example, are companies in the agricultural sector adopting new technologies that are trapping or reducing methane gas coming from cattle? Or are large fashion companies engaging with smaller companies that are producing no plastic or plant-based fabrics? Or are large consumer goods companies working with emerging technologies that are decreasing the dependency on single-use plastics? So, along with many of the other financial factors that they're considering, as well as the present sustainability disclosures that regulators are asking for, I think it is very important for asset managers to increasingly understand the trends associated with sustainable innovation in the private space, and also for investors to keep apprised of the technologies that even larger companies will need to partner with, acquire, or adopt.
Sheila, when I talk with asset managers and financial advisors, and we talk about these types of subjects, one of the things they say is, well, that you're really talking about the stability of deep infrastructure in our economy. How are you accounting for the potential volatility that creates in the markets?
Yeah, there's a lot of new information out there. As I mentioned, sustainable innovation is relatively new. This is why we're seeing it in the private and venture space. And so bringing that forward to their customers or their clients can be tricky. And that's why I kind of think about it as, well, are asset managers looking at whether larger companies are adopting these new technologies or partnering with these new technologies rather than encouraging clients to dive into them because of the volatility factor? Now, it is becoming more available to the retail investor, access to private equity or access to venture capital. But again, that is really at the discretion of the advisor and the asset manager as well.
Okay, good. Now, tell our followers more about the framework that you've developed to help consumers, investors, and asset managers better understand sustainability.
Well, I've often said that to truly drive for a more sustainable world, we need to align three major stakeholders: the investors that are driving capital towards companies that are practicing sustainable initiatives. And of course, Paul, you and I are very familiar with that area. We've spent a good portion of our time focusing on that. Then, of course, there's the companies themselves who need to make sustainability part of their operational excellence. And then the consumer who ultimately drives the demand for sustainability from companies, allowing companies to authentically and more easily evolve their behaviors and shift their operations to be more sustainable. And of course, there's the regulators and the consultants, but I see them all serve as kind of catalysts to this equation. But these three stakeholders really need to be engaged. And while there is a lot going on amongst investors and their relationship to companies, I think there can be more done to strengthen the engagement on this topic with consumers. And look, there's far more than there used to be. And we're all seeing more tidbits on the topic of sustainability everywhere we go. So, what I've developed is a framework that maps the positive actions that we hear about, such as decreasing the use of single use plastics, to how it actually helps drive for more of a sustainable future. I think that companies can also explain their initiatives to their consumers through this framework, as it provides consumers with the right amount of information needed to understand how their actions matter at high levels, and thus allows for commitment. In other words, not too much information that it's overwhelming, but not too little information that it doesn't stick. And that's what the framework is meant to do. It's meant to provide that right level of information, a little bit of a map of what these positive activities are doing to actually help curb climate change or help mitigate the carbon going into the air.
Sometimes when I'm shopping at the market or whatever, I read the labels of products that I'm interested in purchasing, and sometimes the size of the reading on those labels is so small that even with my glasses I can't see it. Is there a way to address those kinds of issues as a day-to-day consumer more effectively?
I think companies have to become more confident in communicating those initiatives to consumers, make it more clear, not have to worry about greenwashing, and then perhaps they will put those in bigger fonts so that consumers will feel more compelled. But there's a lot of scrutiny in this area, and I understand that, everybody is a little bit nervous about putting certain labels on. I don't think a lot of the greenwashing in the industry is intentional. I think it rather just comes from, a lot of pressures that come from these various stakeholders, and then converting that into a language that consumers can understand. And like I said, I think that we need to make sure that we're distilling the right amount of information to consumers, not too little, not too much. And I think the healthcare industry, personal health, like you mentioned before, has done a good job of that. We take our vitamins more, we work out more, not because we understand the intricacies of physiology or, anatomy. Maybe some of us do, but I think for the masses, we don't. But again, they've done a good job in distilling the right amount of information. And that's what I'd like to see for the sustainability industry and the companies involved do.
So other sectors of the economy can learn from the healthcare industry about how to position products and services in a more effective way. That sounds like a good idea to me, because I hear people complaining about, even in the healthcare industry, how they're being communicated with and what they know and don't know about products and services. So as an average daily consumer, what I hear you suggesting is that companies find more ways to effectively communicate with consumers about their products and services, and this will support a better use and a greater use of sustainability-focused products and services. Is that right?
Yes, it's more connectivity to the issue. And I think the other thing is, it's important that we as consumers don't feel like sustainable action is everything, that we have to fully be sustainable to take part in sustainable action. It's not all or none. I believe you can make changes, real behavioral changes, a few steps at a time, and also be equipped with the right information that justifies those changes. So in fact, I'll make a quick plug here. I have a book coming out in September of this year called Simply Sustainable that helps with just that. It's 52 facts along with 52 actions that people can take. So that over the course of 1 year, they're integrating 52 new sustainable behaviors across the everyday parts of their lives, across how they eat, across how they drink, across what cleaning products they use around their house, what they wear, and so forth. Bringing it to the consumer's context or the everyday person's context, helping them engage a bit more.
Okay, so 52. That's one
52.
a week, right? That shouldn't be terribly hard to take into my daily my daily consumer habits. Now, could you give us? I'm really glad that you brought the book up, because we certainly want to support your efforts to distribute that book far and wide. And so, whatever you have coming up that will allow us to promote the publishing of that book, and when it's going to be released, let us know. But can you give us a little look inside the book, one or two examples of the kinds of suggestions you're making?
Sure. One example I'll provide to you, like I said, it's a fact followed by an action so that people feel a little bit more connected to that action through the facts that they know, and hopefully tell others as well. So one example is the US produces nearly 117 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually from air conditioning. This is equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions of 24.5 million passenger vehicles. So the action there is use natural methods of temperature control when possible. For example, use fans and sweaters instead of turning up air conditioners or heaters. Again, Paul, very simple, in fact, very intuitive. We all know this, but I think that when you link it with such an important number, like, wow, our greenhouse gas emissions through air conditioning is leading to 24.5 million passenger vehicles worth of greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide emissions, all of a sudden you start paying attention to that more. And, using that sweater or turning on that fan doesn't seem as bad.
How can all of us as consumers support these connections becoming more tangible on a daily basis? I mean, I can do it for myself, and I belong to groups in my community where I can talk about it. I guess those are probably two really, probably the most effective ways on a day-to-day basis that we can participate. Is that right?
We tell our friends, we tell people, we talk about it. Again, the more intelligence we're equipped with, the more we want to tell people. People inherently like showing off about the things that they know. And so, I think that's always an effective way. But again, like I go back to, there needs to be alignment between the three major stakeholders. Investors have to do their parts, consumers have to do their parts, and in between, that should, hopefully help companies really make behavioral shifts, operational shifts, that what we're producing out there is in fact sustainable, and that becomes the next norm or the next option available to us.
Great. Okay, Sheila, where online can followers of the Sustainable Finance Podcast go to learn more about your Radiant Global Advisory, and how can they get in touch with you regarding, among other things, news about the launch of your book when it's coming out? Let's give the title again to everybody, and other topics that we've discussed in today's episode.
Sure. So I have two major websites. One is for the advisory work I do with companies, and that is www.radiantglobaladvisory.com. I'm sure we can probably put that in the notes. Is that right, Paul?
Sure.
Great. And then for the book and for more of that consumer side, it's been a bit of a passion project. I've been running a platform or a website for nearly 3 years. I involve my 12-year-old son, where he does, in fact, a 5-minute podcast about monthly, talking about sustainability issues. But that information, along with my book, Simply Sustainable, can be found at www.sustainableme.today.
Great. Okay, well, thanks again to Shila Wattamwar of Radiant Global Advisory. And for our followers, please join me again next week for another episode. I'm Paul Ellis, your host, and this is the Sustainable Finance Podcast.